So welcome, Olgeta, and thanks everyone for your participation in exploring our world using Google Earth, the second collaborative project to be launched as part of the new suite of PASS activities for both PNG and Australian educators and students. It's great to have you here today. For those that perhaps haven't met me before, I'm Sophie Howlett, based at the University of Melbourne, and part of a project team that design, deliver and support learning activities for the PNGAus Partnership Secondary Schools Initiative. It's great to see you all. Before going further, we'd like to take a minute for an acknowledgement of country. Today's acknowledgement of the Gubi Gubi Kabi Kabi peoples has been shared by Mountain Creek State High School, located in the southeast of Queensland, and partner school to Mount Hagen Secondary School in the highlands of PNG.
We acknowledge
the traditional owners
and custodians
of this land,
we acknowledge
the waterways,
the land,
the sky,
and all who
inhabit this place.
country.
we acknowledge
Our ancestors.
We acknowledge
our elders
who have gone before us,
and all
who stand
For us
today.
We acknowledge our past
and stand here
For our future
country.
Well, I think you'll agree that was a really fitting acknowledgement when you consider the focus of this session this afternoon on all the wonderful places and countries that you can visit using Google Earth technology to explore the world today. As is the tradition with PASS, I'd now like to invite one of our PNG participants, one of our new participants, to open the session with an opening prayer. So if I can call upon Judy Weiser to deliver the opening prayer for this session.
Thank you. Okay. We will all close our eyes. Those of us watching from Australia, friends in Australia, and the participants here in this room, we will have to close our eyes and bow our heads. I will pray for us. Thank you, dear Heavenly Father. Father, we thank you. This is another new day you have given us. Father, we acknowledge your presence in everything, Lord. Father, this is another opportunity for Papua New Guinea to be a partner with a foreign country, Australia, Father, particularly with the education system in our country. And this is another open door for anger problems, particularly, Father, in one of our schools. The Australian government has intervened and brought forward the facility here. And we thank you, Lord. We thank you and we acknowledge you, Father. Lord, for your wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, Father, we acknowledge you. And I also pray for those who are here, and Junior and Heron, Father God, Lord, we pray and uphold them back to you, Father. Give them wisdom and knowledge so that, Father, they will do the job that they are doing right now, Father, throughout the country and even to other nations. Father God, Lord, I pray this prayer, the short prayer here, as the opening of this program, Father God, I pray in Jesus' name and declare this session be open. In the name of the Lord Jesus, I pray. And everyone can say, Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Judy. That was lovely. and a great way to open this session. And I should have mentioned that you're joining us today from the very remote location of Andetale Secondary School. It's great to have Andetale with us today. And further to that, I'd like to acknowledge the team from AAPNG joining us also from Andetale. We've got Aaron O'Shaughnessy, Anna and Junior with us. So great to have you in the session, along with all the other Papua New Guinean and Australian participants. Thank you. Can I also introduce my colleague at the Asia Education Foundation, University of Melbourne, Nicole Bratchford, who's joining us and supporting with delivery of this session. I'm just going to take a moment now to outline the agenda and touch on the technology for today before introducing you to our special guest, Dr. John Bailey. So the agenda there in front of you, we're going to start by introducing the activity and the materials that have been developed to support the activity. We're going to explore what is Google Earth together. John is going to give us a little bit of a demonstration on Google Earth, and it may be that you can participate in that. We hope that you can. We've also created some space for asking questions, and we encourage you to do that using the hands up in the air, raised hand icon at the bottom of your screen. So don't hold back with your questions. We encourage you to ask questions. No questions are silly. And then at the end of the session, Nicole's going to spend some time just touching on next steps and reminders as we launch into phase 2 of PASS. And if I can just spend a couple of moments on etiquette for the session, we ask you to, if you're not speaking to the wider group, please keep your microphone on mute. We very much encourage you to continue introducing yourselves via the chat. And when you do that, it'd be great if you can put your name in and the school that you're from. We'd be really interested to see that and to see the use of the chat. And then, as I said, we encourage you to use the raised hand function for any questions. I'd now like to introduce Dr. John Bailey. Some of you may have met John when he delivered a virtual reality session back in March 2020 in Port Moresby as part of the PASS orientation program. John travelled to Port Moresby, and so his face may be familiar to some of you. That was all pre-COVID, of course. Since then, John has continued to be part of PASS and has been working on the publishing of 360 imagery of PNG schools to Street View. And we believe there are lots of clicks happening on that Street View, and it's really great to have that completed. He's now here to help kick off the 2022-23 series of PASS activities, particularly Exploring Our World, a collection of manuals, guides and a workbook of exercises that empower students to explore, understand and tell stories about our planet through the virtual globe application Google Earth. I'll hand over to John now to introduce and guide us through Exploring Our World. Thanks, John.
All right, thank you, Sophie. Aloha, everyone. My name is John Bailey. I'm actually speaking to you right now from Oahu, Hawaii. This is where I'm currently living because we don't need to go into my full bio. It's available on the website. But the story right now is I just started training as a student classroom teacher. So I'm becoming certified as a classroom science teacher. I spent today with 120 ninth graders. So hopefully I've got some energy left for you guys. So since I'm in Hawaii, it's dark here already, so I'm afraid the lighting on me is not very good. But once I switch over to slides, I'm actually going to turn my video feed off just so hopefully we'll get a better experience on my internet. And with that, let's just dive straight in. So give me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay, so the theme of the session is exploring our world, but really we could add on to that title, and it's exploring our world through Google Earth. So what is this thing, Google Earth? Well, hopefully you've all heard of it. I'm pretty sure everyone here has at least heard of Google, and you've probably heard of Google Maps and maybe Google Earth, or you get Google Earth and Google Maps confused. So let's try and start off with a little bit of a explanation of what it is and a little bit of history about it and how it relates to my history and how it relates to my involvement with the PASS program. So Google Earth is a 3D model of our planet. Basically, we take what we call terrain data, a 3D model of all the mountains and the valleys and the shape of our Earth, over which we've overlain satellite images. And so it makes this explorable model of our whole world, because on that basic canvas, there's all this extra data, information about places, models of buildings and things. So it literally is like a virtual representation of our planet. Now, this is in contrast to Google Maps, which is really just a sort of flat representation of there is a 3D version of maps, so I won't confuse you with that. But really the way of thinking about Google Earth versus Google Maps is, if you want to find directions for places, you go and use Google Maps. If you want to get lost in the world, you use Google Earth. So it's really a great tool for exploration. But let's back up a little bit. Like, where did this Google Earth thing come from? Well, it's sort of a concept that's been around for a long time, back in the early days of science fiction writing. But really, it was a technology that was waiting on certain things to happen in human development. And there's sort of three things that I point to that really led to the birth of Google Earth and similar applications. One was the development of video gaming technology and graphics cards, allowing you to create these amazing visualizations like that picture over mountains in PNG that I just showed. Two, and you can argue, I guess, for certain parts of the world, we're still working on this part, having good internet connections, having broadband internet, and the sort of bandwidth and speed that you need to deliver these graphics. Because as good as you make these processes, you know, things slow down if you don't have good internet. I'm sure you all can speak to that. And then, of course, you need the images, and this was the key one. You know, we've had continuous monitoring from satellites taking pictures of the Earth since the early 70s with the launch of the Landsat program. But it was really only in 2000, 2001 when satellites such as Iconus and QuickBirds, you can look these names up online, launched, and they made what we call high resolution satellite data commercially available. And by high resolution, I mean that one little pixel on the screen represents just meters or even just tens of centimeters on the ground. So you get these wonderful shots like we're looking here at Circular Quay and down on the Opera House in Sydney. So bringing all these things together allowed the creation of what we call virtual globe technologies. And one of the early ones was made by a 2001 Silicon Valley near San Francisco in California, a startup company called Keyhole, who made this Earth Viewer technology. And you'll understand why I've called it Google Earth version 1 in just a second. So as I say, this company was founded in 2001, and really what helped it sort of carry on existing is it got the attention of the CIA, and that this technology could be used as a way of like plotting information about countries, about military things, and they helped fund it a little bit. Now, Google also discovered this technology, and in fact, they bought Keyhole in 2004, and then a year later, they released Google Earth, or they basically repackaged the technology, and they rebranded it Google Earth, and they released it as version 3. So there was never really a version 2 of Google Earth, and the version 1 was that Keyhole. So we started at version 3. This is what it looks like. And it became very popular. Now, it was released summer 2005. I discovered it a few months after that. The first week I was starting in October 2005, I was starting a postdoc in Fairbanks, Alaska, the Alaska Volcano Observatory. So my background is I have a master's PhD in volcanology, which I got from the University of Hawaii, in fact. So this is my second time living in Hawaii. And then after I finished here, I moved up to Alaska, and we discovered this technology as an amazing tool for exploring landscapes, because that's what I did in my studies. I looked at volcanic landscapes using satellite imagery. And one of the biggest pains I faced was just loading up images and draping it over terrain data and trying to see different things. And then suddenly there was this Google Earth tool that allowed me, all of that stuff was already there. And more than that, it allowed me to start annotating on this map, on this 3D canvas. So, we were like, wow, this is awesome. We can do great things with this. Like, for example, how about we go to our friends at the Smithsonian, who are sort of the librarians of where all the volcanoes in the world are and what's happening with them, and get them to like make a layer in Google Earth that shows all these volcanoes. And that's what we did. And this helped get us the attention of Google. So for the next 5 or 6 years, I sort of became this concierge to the science community for the Google Earth team, because I got to know the Google Earth team and I would visit Google. And I, of course, was operating in the science world. And we had this relationship where the science world knew me as the person who could speak to Google, and Google were seeing me as the go-to person for content and ideas around science. And all this time, Google Earth is developing as a better and better technology. I should point out at this stage, Google Earth is a downloadable desktop experience. So you would have to take your Mac or your PC, and you would have to download an application and install it on the desktop. So it was very intensive in terms of the resources it used on your computer and the bandwidth it used and all these things. But we were seeing this as just having great potential for learning, not just in science, but all across education. So that's really where my sort of work and focus started to head, so much so to the point that in 2014, Google actually offered me a job to go work with the Google Earth team as a program manager for education using Google Earth. So that's what I did. Now, this also happened to coincide with a sort of period of limbo for Google Earth. They weren't really sure where to go with it. They weren't doing too much new development with it because it sort of hit a wall. I pointed out that it was very resource intensive. So, this was a barrier for a lot of users. You couldn't use it on Chromebooks, for example. So what they decided to do was to rebuild Google Earth and make it into a web-based application that would be a lot more streamlined, so a lot more accessible for people with weaker internet connections, usable on Chromebooks, all of these things that were important to the education community. And I was able to be part of that. I've since moved on from Google. I decided to change direction a few months before the pandemic happened, which was like, you know, not the greatest decision in the end, but it did mean I wasn't having to do a whole lot of online working during the pandemic. So this is the new version of Google Earth. This is where you can reach it at that address. We'll come back to that in a minute. But let's talk about the connection to the PASS program. As Sophie already mentioned, I did get to come to PNG in March 2020. We literally got out, I believe, the day before Australia closed the borders because of the pandemic. So this was sort of the last hands-on stuff anyone could do. It was also my second visit to PNG. I had visited 20 years before as part of a research cruise. So it was really fascinating to see the changes in the country. And then also, as Sophie mentioned, a year later, we were thinking, well, what are some of the online projects we can do around this work? Now, when we were in PNG, we did this great workshop developing these virtual reality tours using 360 images that many of you had collected on campuses. But unfortunately, Google, in the interim, decided to sort of stop their VR application and program. But we still had all this 360 imagery. So we said, well, what's a way that we could share this with the world? And we said, well, why don't we put it into Street View? So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Street View, but I will point out that this was a really fun project for me to do because I have never been to any of your schools. And I had all these 360 images and I could find your schools in maps, but there was no location data for the 360 images. So I had to use a combination of satellite images and looking around in the 360 images and figuring out exactly where to locate them. It was kind of like a giant treasure hunt. But you know, that was fun and it was great, and you know, the PASS folks were sort of impressed by the methods that I'd used to discover where to place these, and so they were like, originally, well, maybe you could give a seminar on this. And then it was decided, well, okay, maybe more than just talking about Street View, what about if we start producing some learning materials around maps or Earth or Street View? In fact, can you just build us a Google Earth user manual that will teach our teachers and our students how to use this tool? So that's what I put together at the end of last year. And again, that was well received. So they came back to me and said, well, can you maybe run some seminars to introduce these materials to people and maybe build some workbook exercises and guides to these? So these are what we're launching for you today and introducing for you today. This set of materials that will hopefully allow you to become comfortable exploring in and using Google Earth, and teach you all the different things that you can do in there. So what we're going to do in the rest of the session today is give you an overview of these materials and dive into Google Earth and sort of show you the basics of how to use it and get you started with this process. But before we go live on Google Earth, I'm going to show you the materials briefly. And I should also point out, if you've got any questions, we will have a Q&A at the end, but please put them in the chat. And Nicole and Sophie and others will be monitoring that. And you know, guys, if there's something urgent, just please speak up and I can answer as we're at that point. Okay, so you should all have the PASS website. And you can find the materials there. You're going to find three things there. The first thing you're going to find is a student workbook. And you can think of this as a series of exercises that walk you through from the basic to the more complex, that teach you all the functions and abilities of Google Earth. You know, well, I won't say I promise you, but I like to think that if you work your way through these exercises, you will know how to use all the features in Google Earth by the time you're done. So there's 5 chapters in there, and they have different names, but really the way you can think about these as chapter 1 teaches you the basics, things like navigation, stuff we're going to show you in just a second. Chapter 2 introduces you to some of the sort of what I call map functionality in there. So for example, the ability to interact with Street View in Google Earth. Chapter 3 is where it gets really good. Chapter 3 introduces you to the content is in there, because as well as giving you this model of the globe, Google has also come up with a way of creating place marks and overlays and lines and polygons that they can curate together to sort of create maps, and more than that, create stories with these markers and with images, and even embed videos and things to create what I call geospatial stories on the globe. And so there's a way of viewing these things, but more importantly, there's a way of creating your own versions of these, creating what we call Google Earth projects to put your own geospatial stories on the globe. And then chapter 5 there is a sort of more of a deep dive for those of you that like the physics and the remote sensing and the science behind this. It gets into explaining what you're really seeing in Google Earth, understanding what satellite images are all about. You know, that you don't need to do that chapter to do the rest of it, but it is quite a fascinating avenue to go round if you like this stuff. So that's the student guide or the student workbook. There is also a teacher guide that goes with this. Now, in the teacher guide, they give you a little summary here of what those materials available are. I also have put together some very commonly asked questions about Google Earth, so you can see the answers there. And you'll see most of these questions refer to the Google Earth user manual, which I'll talk about in a second. But that's that user guide that I've mentioned already. And in fact, we have an index to it here. So the user manual, you can kind of think of it, if I just go over here, I'll sort of speak about this now. You can think of it as like the sort of the guidebook that comes with your car or a piece of technology. It shows you what all the buttons and the features do and how the settings work and everything. So it very much is built as a manual rather than as a tutorial. The tutorials are the student workbook exercises. The user manual is just that. It's a user manual. But the two are closely integrated, as you go through the student workbook exercises, there are lots and lots of references to pages in the user manual. And we've made sort of multiple versions of the user manual available. There's a web version, refers to the web version of Google Earth, which is the one we're going to demo in a second. There's also a mobile app version of Google Earth, which looks very similar, but it lacks some key functionality that the web version has. Specifically, you can't build projects on the mobile version. And of course, it looks very different on a phone versus a laptop. So that's why it has its own separate manual down there. But we're going to be focusing on the web version here. But just to finish up with the content here, to go back to the teacher guide, the other thing that we have in the teacher guide is there's an overview of the key understandings and learnings that you get in each of the workbook exercises. So they're listed out here. We then, and I'll come back to this at the end of my presentation, we then link them to the past capabilities that you're probably all very familiar with. And we give examples of how they link to the Australian curriculum and to do the developing, I'm sorry, for some reason that page's not loading. Oh, here we go. The developing PNG STEM curriculum. Oh, and as it's not shown right here, but the teachers will be happy to know that I've also included all of the answers for you to the student exercises. So much as it's good practice for you guys to do them yourselves, if you get a bit stuck, there's all the answers available as well. All right. I'll just pause for a second and see if there's any quick questions about that. Let's see. How can you download the free docs? So Jerry, if you go to the link that's in the chat there, they're all available on that web page. So if you go to that link, I can post it just again right here. If you go to that link and scroll down, you should find them at the bottom of that page. If you're still struggling with that, please reach out to one of the team and they can help you. All right, let's move on. And so I'm going to go into Google Earth now. What I'll say at this juncture is, if you've maybe used Google Earth before a little bit, and or you're familiar, you're comfortable sort of listening and playing at the same time, then please feel free to just sort of follow along with the stuff I'm going to do now. If this is new to you, if you maybe have limited bandwidth, or you haven't quite figured out how to get onto Google Earth yet, I should put that up as I'm saying this actually, right here. Then, I recommend just watch me do this. We're recording this session. You can always later go back and watch the recording and do the sort of follow along at that stage, or hopefully do the workbook exercises. So there's no wrong or right here, like watch, follow, somewhere in between, whatever you're comfortable with. But to start out with, this is the URL you need to go to. earth.google.com/web, or actually g.co, so g.co/earth should also work. You need to do this in a web browser and go and open up Google Earth. And when you do, it's going to look like this. All right, so it's going to look like this, but I'm going to jump back to slides for just a second to explain what you're seeing there. So obviously the main part of the screen is taken up by this model of the world, what I'm going to refer to as the globe. Now in the bottom right hand corner, we have on-screen navigation controls, which is going to be the first thing that we discuss. There are multiple ways to navigate in Google Earth, and on-screen clicking is just one of them. At the bottom of the screen, there's the thing called the status bar. And this shows you a number of things. It shows you in the bottom right-hand corner, the coordinates of where your cursor is currently. There's a scale bar. There's credit of where the data you're viewing is coming from. And actually quite a useful thing, there's a loading percentage. So if you think you're not seeing the right imagery, if it looks a bit blurry, if that number's not 100, that's why. If that number's 100 and the imagery is blurry, that just means there's not very good imagery for that place. There's a couple of project shortcuts there. Don't worry about them for this session. We're going to get to that in later seminars. Worry more about what I've called features and functionality, because these are things that we are going to get into in this session. All right, so let's go back to Google Earth here. And first things first, navigation. All right, so there's kind of four main components to navigation. The first thing is to be able to do what we call panning. And you can think of this as the ability to grab and move the earth. So right now, I tend to navigate using the trackpad on my laptop and keys. You will rarely see me use this stuff down in the corner. I don't use a mouse. However, all these things are good, and use whatever works for you. So what I'm doing right now is clicking and grabbing on the trackpad. You could also click and move your mouse. I think it will probably be the left button click. Or if you have keys, it's very easy to just use keys to move. Now, we're actually not panning right now. When we use the keys, we're sort of rotating. So you can hold the key down and it'll make you very dizzy spinning the globe. Now, of course, one of the key things in Google Earth is the fact that we don't have to stay at this global level. We have an ability to zoom in. So right now, I'm again on my trackpad and I'm swiping 2 fingers up or down. If you have a mouse, the best way to do this is the scroll wheel on the mouse. Or if you have none of that or you're unsure, this is where these on-screen displays can be useful. This plus and minus will zoom in. And in fact, as I start to zoom in there, notice in the little globe map here, we get a red square showing your what's called field of view, everything you can basically see on the screen right now. Now this brings us to our 4th navigation feature. And this is the thing that makes Google Earth different. We've talked about how it's a 3D model. So if it's a 3D model, we want to see that 3D-ness. So how do we do this? Well, this is where it can get a little tricky. Now, if I want to use the on-screen displays, I have to first of all double-click on this little compass to bring this up. Now, the compass is a navigation tool. If we click and rotate, or click and drag, it sort of rotates. But actually to tilt, we need to click in the middle there and push up. It's very awkward to do. So here's the cheat code. It's best to use the keyboard. Hold the shift key and use the arrows. That is the best way to tilt. And if we start doing this and we do some zooming in, we really start to get a great look at the terrain. There we are. That's kind of similar to the screenshot you saw at the start of my slide presentation. Right, so those are the 4 main features of navigating. And honestly, you know, if all you sort of do after this session is go away and practice doing that, along with a couple of the other key things I'm going to show you, that's a great learning experience, because that will allow you to fly around and navigate the globe and start exploring it. Please let me know if there's any questions on that. I'm going to keep going, but put questions in the chat if you have some. Now, another key part to this is you'll notice that my globe looks what we call clean. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, let me teach you a couple of other quick navigation features. Right now, my view is all rotated. And if I want to quickly get back to north, I can hit the N key. Also, if I was tilted and I wanted to look straight down again, I can hit the U key for up. And if I'm both those things and I'm lazy, I can hit the R key for reset. Those are some useful shortcuts. All right, but back to what I was saying about this being a clean version of Google Earth. Now, I might need some help navigating around the world. And as we know from Google Maps, that information is available. So to turn it on in Google Maps, we need to go to the map style layer, which is this button right here, the second one up, the little tile icon. We've got the ruler icon, the tile icon. Or there's a quick key for this. If you hit the N button, it opens up map style. And here we have some different options. Here we can do a sort of basic, it will give country names and it will put like state borders and things. Or we can dump everything. Now, these might look kind of the same when we're this far zoomed out. But if we zoom in here and start to go down to a city, you'll start to see there's a lot of information will pop up. And if we back out to exploration, you will see it's a lot less cluttered. Or my sort of favorite one to use is custom. Now with custom, we can choose which features we want to appear or not. Now, one of the features you can make appear is clouds, because you may have noticed when we had a global view right there, there was a key thing missing. There were no clouds. And, you know, certainly those of you living in Papua New Guinea will be like, what are you talking about? There's always clouds. There's always rain. But in Google Earth, we have the power to turn them on or off. Now, there's one version where we can turn them on there. There's actually a second version down here, which is really cool, where we can turn them on. And this is a little bit resource intensive. And see, it's even taking my internet a few seconds to come up. But what's great about this version is it's annotated clouds. So in fact, it's the last 24 hours of real cloud cover. This is data from satellites. The lag is somewhere between 15 minutes and 2 hours. But these are the clouds that are around right now. So you can use this as a teaching tool about whether that's happening. And there we are, you know, on cue, PNG is cloudy. Now, along similar lines, there's a couple other things we can turn on down here. One of which is grid lines. And now I love this as a geography teaching tool. You can teach things about, you know, what the equator means in the tropics and why we define things like the Arctic Circle in the way that we do. And as you zoom in, you'll get more and more details. So you can teach about coordinate systems and understanding how you find locations on Earth. And then the other feature we have here is the 3D buildings. Now, this is really great for those of you that maybe haven't, say, been to a big city before. So I'm going to take you to one of the biggest cities of them all. Right here, this is New York, and we're hovering over Manhattan. And now at the moment, it just kind of looks like the rest of the imagery we've been seeing, or at least it would if we'd gone over urban areas. But if I tilt my view and start to zoom in, what appears is this 3D landscape. And again, it will take a few seconds to resolve here, but it's going to get better and better. And you're going to see these amazing 3D models of the buildings there. All of which, by the way, I should point out, is extrapolated from satellite and aerial photography. This isn't someone making models. This is all automatically created by computer algorithms from the other data, which is a really amazing thing. Even the trees here have been generated. All right, so let's get rid of that and let's back out again, because time is ticking and I want to show you lots more things. Now, I manually navigated to New York. I knew where to find it, but at times it might be hard to find stuff. You might not know where it is on Earth. So to help with that, we can go to this magnifying icon here, which is the search panel. And we can type in a name of a place, and it will give us maybe a bunch of different options, but I just chose the first one there and flew down to Sydney. So again, for Sydney, you're going to discover that there's some really good 3D imagery. We have the Opera House, we have the Harbour Bridge. This is really great. Here we are. This is Balmain over here. This is where I spent 2020 living. And so we found that by going, again, to the search bar here and doing a search for things. Now, I'm not going to deep dive into this too much because this is one of the workbook exercises. But you don't have to just search for place names. You can search for things. You can search for coordinates. But let's search for a thing. Let's try searching for a Great Wall and see what happens. Well, I'm over Sydney right now. So when I search for Great, it's going to give me it looks like a travel agency and a couple of Chinese takeaways. That's because the program was saying, okay, you're zoomed in on Sydney right now. You must want information about Sydney. If I zoom out and try and do this, and we'll see if this works. And please all try this and let me know in the chat what result you get. I'm going to sort of zoom out to a global view and I'm going to search again. Now, because we're at a global view, Google Earth is saying, oh, I don't know where you want to search. Like, let me do this. I know you're currently located in Hawaii from your internet connection. Therefore, I'm going to give you results related to Hawaii. So it's giving me a Chinese restaurant in Wahiawa, Oahu. Now, what if in fact I actually didn't want any of these? If in fact what I was looking for was the Great Wall of China, well, it turned out I needed to sort of search better. And in fact, maybe just do the complete search. Look for that. And now, finally, hopefully, I'm going to head to China. So be aware that search is not just based on the geography of where you're looking in Google Earth at the time. It's also based on where you're logging in from. Now, you might be saying, okay, well, this is really cool. I like to explore the world, but you know what? I have no idea where I want to go. Well, we have a button for that too. You might have heard of the I'm feeling lucky function in Google. Well, we have the I'm feeling lucky button in Google Earth. It's this little die here, this middle icon. Now, if you click on this, it's going to randomly fly you to some place in the world. It's taking me, in this case, to a state park in Pennsylvania. Now, you guys try this. I all but assure you, you're going to get a completely different result to the one I just got. Let me try it again. All right, now I've gone to the islands. Let's try again. And now we're looking at a water feature in Italy. So what's happening there? It's going to its database of cities, lakes, rivers, oceans, mountains, streams, synagogues, churches, mountain ranges, valleys, ocean features, all of these tens of thousands of features, and it's finding interesting places. And just like it did on search, I didn't mention that, it's bringing up a little information card over here, which in fact we can link to or click on, and it links us to more information. Again, I'm not going to deep dive on this because this is stuff that the manual and the workbook exercises will help walk you through. All right, now let's see. What's another tool we can introduce you to? Well, now we know how to search. Let's start by going Torres Strait. Now I'm going to use this bottom icon here because we're going to land at the Torres Strait here, so we can, see the gap between Australia and PNG. But it's like, well, how far is that? I know there's a scale at the bottom there, but it's kind of hard to see. And you know what? How do I define the gap between Australia and PNG? Is it the mainland? Is it the islands? What do we do here exactly? Well, first of all, we can click on this icon at the bottom, and it opens up the ruler tool. And to use the ruler tool, we need to take our cursor, which is just turned into a cross here, and click on a point. And then we can drag it out and click on another point and say, oh, it looks like the PNG and Australian mainland, they're just over 150 kilometers apart. Alternatively, let me undo that and say, okay, well, what's the distance to the islands here? Or we could zoom in on the island and say, you know, say I'm done, let's start again. What if I want to know the size of this island? I'm going to do this very quick and crudely here, but I can make a perimeter and I can close the perimeter, and now I can get the area and the perimeter values. And I can get them up here in lots of different units as well. All right, so lots of quick tools and navigation there. We're doing good on time, so I'm just going to pause briefly and see if anyone has any questions. Please, you know, speak up or raise your hand or put it in the chat. No questions? Okay, well, that's good. That means either I'm doing a great job of explaining or you're all really bored. So hopefully it's the first one. So, okay, what else do we have here? Well, again, I'm going to use the search tool up here that we know how to use. And I'm going to search for the Taj Mahal. Now, if we go to the Taj Mahal, you know, certain countries, you'll find that there's different levels of information and data because certain countries don't want Google showing certain things. So it can be very, you know, difficult to get good data in some places. In other places, you're not going to see the 3D models, such as here. But what we do have here is that street view imagery that we talked about before. So how do we access that? Well, first of all, what is street? Well, no, let's first of all, how do we access that? Well, it's very easy. Down in our on-screen controls here, this is one of the things that I do use. There's a little icon here that looks like a little person. We call that Pegman. Pegman, when he's off, or she is off, is white. And when we turn them on, they turn yellow. So if we click them, they turn on. Now you'll see suddenly there's all these blue lines appeared on the map. And these blue lines show us where Street View exists. So if we go and we click on a blue line, we fly into Street View. Now what Street View is, and I think many of you are familiar with this because many of you collected the imagery that we worked with before. They're 360 images taken by special cameras. You can think of this as if you're in a giant bubble with all of around you, the landscape sort of projected onto it. And you can connect these bubbles together and navigate between them. So here we are at the Taj Mahal, and it looks like we're in an unconnected bubble right now, just a single image, but that's fine. I can maybe back out, see if I could get more of a connected view. So you can see how these things navigate together. Let's try right there. There we go. Now we've got our little white chevrons that allow us to click and move as if we're walking through the landscape. So, you know, we can find this imagery wherever it's been published around the world. Now, some countries it's been officially launched in, for example, Australia. So in Australia, you'll see there's lots of blue lines because Google has driven the special Street View cars and done other ways of collecting. Now in PNG, it hasn't officially launched, but you're still going to see some blue dots. And we're responsible for some of those blue dots. If I jump to maps real quickly, you'll see that we've published, as we talked about before, a lot of these campus images. And so you will find these on map. Now, I apologize to a couple of the schools out there. A couple of you won't find your dots yet. Your imagery is still being processed. It will take a few more days potentially. I don't know offhand which schools that is, but I do know that, for example, Warwin has been published. So if we fly in here and we turn on Pegman, what you will see are these blue dots that appear. And if we click on the blue dot, we can see that, and you can see the little credits to pass right there. And there we are. Maybe some of you are even in that picture if we have Warwin on the line. We're going to talk a little more about Street View in the next session, so I'll have some better examples to show you there. But the final thing I just want to end with here is to talk about the sort of two buttons we haven't clicked on yet. So one right here, this little kind of ship's navigation wheel, is called the Voyager layer. One here is the projects button. So it makes most sense to talk about Voyager to begin with, because Voyager is that curated content that I mentioned before that Google has brought together. So for example, in layers, this is where we can go and we can find my volcano layer. So when we click on that, it opens up these place marks showing all the volcanoes, these markers showing where there's all volcanoes around the world. And in fact, we can then zoom in and find some of our favorite volcanoes. Let's go to Rabaul, and we can get more information about that. In fact, we can even click that and it will open a web page at the Smithsonian that will tell you even more information, for example, about its current activity that's going on. Let's see if there's anything there. All right. So you get the idea. There's lots of information. But to go back to Voyager, there's all sorts of stuff in there. And in fact, when we were doing the search, the content in there was coming up. So we weren't just getting place options, we were actually getting options of things that relate to that location. So if we search for PNG, okay, I didn't want to go to the place, I actually wanted to look for guided tours. So there are a couple of PNG specific guided tours, for example, one that the BBC put together that explores birds of paradise across the country. If we were to search Australia in here, there is a lot of content, including a whole sort of best of Street View in Australia layer. So you can explore around and see all these different types of content and what's available. I really do encourage you to do that. Just really start clicking things and seeing what's available, because it will give you ideas for this last thing, which is really the core of what we want to do with this PASS programming activity, which is to get you guys building your own content. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is you can make stuff like you see in Voyager for yourself. So for example, this is one thing that I put together, and I'm going to go into present mode without really explaining too much here, because next session is all about this. But it allows you to tell stories using markers, using the landscape, using images, using text, using videos and things, if you want, about places. This obviously is the story of the Kokoda Track campaign, an important feature for both PNG and Australia and their relationship. It's relating to battles that happened as part of World War II here. And so we're telling this story chronologically using this project. And this is the great thing about projects, is they're not just necessarily points on a map. They can have a narrative. So they can tell a story. And so next session, we're gonna deep dive into this and teach you how to use the functionality in here and get you to make your own projects, which in our session after that, we're then going to have you share with everybody else. So I won't say any more about that at this time, but this is where you're heading with this. And in order to get there, though, you need to understand kind of how Google Earth works. So you need to know how to navigate around, how to search for places, how to sort of look up features on the map, find features on the map. So this is why it's really important for you to practice. And really the easiest way to do this is exercise or chapters 1 and 2 in the workbook exercises, because this will work you through these exact things. And just to kind of revisit that and revisit what you're sort of learning for that, I said I would do this. I like to put sort of everything I've just shown you into 3 types of categories, what I call understanding, exploration, and storytelling. So we have the 3D model and what we call the vector data, the information on that 3D model that we access through navigation and through changing the map styles. And then we have, and that's about understanding the world, understanding, you know, the images and how you get places. Then we have exploration, the search tool, the I'm feeling lucky, the measuring of the ruler, even diving into Street View. Those are functions on our map, on our globe, that allow us to explore. And that in turn leads us to the content, the Voyager layer, the ability to make your own projects that are like Voyager. That's the storytelling. And these 3 things, it's no accident that we kind of have these categories in here, because when Google Earth was rebuilt for the web, they talked to us who worked on education around Google Earth, and they said, well, what are the important facts and what important features to have in there that will help education? So this isn't an accident. This is all by design. And then this, too much text here, don't read it. It's in the teacher guide, but this is, again, just to go back to the point that what you're learning here really does speak to the past capabilities of digital literacy, of both local and global citizenship, and of thinking how you communicate, and creative thinking of how you can collaborate and show cultural understanding around the world. So we think, you know, Google Earth and the work we've done is a really great fit for this. We hope that you'll all be sort of inspired to work through the exercises and to join us when we start building the projects and share those projects, because I think you'll find that this can be a great tool for you in the classroom. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And we have time for questions, I believe. So let's see, there's a question in the tab. How can we be able to view movement of things on Google Earth? Okay, I'm not necessarily sure what you mean by view movement of things. If you mean, can we do animations in there? Can we do changing images? Sort of, yes. You can't, unfortunately, right now, when you're making projects, you can't get like place marks to sort of move around. But there is a really cool layer/Voyager feature in there that's called time lapse. I'll leave it to you to look it up. But what time lapse is it's images taken over many, many years that you can animate through. So in fact, there's nearly 40 years of data in there. So you know what, this is so cool that actually we will look at this. I'm going to share my screen again. I see another related question. Can we see water move? No, I'm sorry that we can't right now. There used to be a feature like that in the old desktop version, but it hasn't been translated over yet. But let's go back, and I'm just going to cheat here. Time lapse right here. Hopefully my bandwidth will hold up to this. You can see up here that there's a sort of timeline. And hopefully it might take a little bit to load here. You'll see that the timeline is going through years. And once it's kind of cached my images, you'll start to see the better resolution flickering up here. But what you'll see is an image for each of these years. And what's great about that is it allows you to see changes in the landscape. In this case, you can see areas of deforestation. You can see areas where we've seen urban growth. You can see areas where there's coastal change, where glaciers have grown or more likely shrunk, where lakes have dried up. There's some positive things too. It's not all depressing climate change, but there is quite a lot of climate change examples in there. And this isn't just one location. This is, in fact, a global thing. You can go anywhere on the planet and see these changes. There's a whole lot more I could say about time lapse. I maybe won't right now, but next time, if people really love it after they've had a chance to play, I can explain kind of where it comes from and stuff if that's of interest. Actually fits more in that chapter 5 area of explaining images in Google Earth.
John,
Charles, yes, please unmute yourself and speak up.
Good afternoon, John.
Afternoon.
I just have a general question here. Why is a Google Earth so blurry?
Okay, yeah. So we briefly covered that earlier. There's possibly 2 reasons for that. One reason is if we look down, if you can see my screen, am I still sharing? Can you guys see? Yeah, down at the very bottom here on this status bar, there's a Google logo and then it says 100%. Now that means that the images have all loaded, and if I move my position, you'll see that will change from 100 temporarily. So it might be that the reason it's blurry is because your internet connection is not giving you 100%, like it's just not loading the images fully. It may have even given you 100%, but it's not kind of bringing up the full resolution because it's struggling with bandwidth. The other reason images could be blurry is for a specific location, they just might be low resolution. Again, there's a bit in the workbook exercises that explains this. You will find that urban areas will always have better resolution than urban areas. And that's just an artifact of Google wants users to look at the images. And most of the users live in urban areas, and so that's where they tend to fly to. And so, unfortunately, that's where they tend to focus their collection of imagery on. It's just how it unfortunately works. You know, I think one really fascinating thing that could be part of this activity and project, particularly for the PNG schools, is understanding how good or bad the imagery is around your towns and your schools. You know, that would be nice to know. And also, more importantly, understanding how well you can or can't access that with your internet connections. This is a conversation the past team and I have been having, because this is part of our learning process, is like, you know, how can we make this tool a better tool for you, understanding the limitations that you might have with the technology and internet. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, John, thank you.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Sorry,
yeah.
Hi, John. I have one question for you. I'm just really curious to know about Google Led projects. Can you explain more on that? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. You know, next session is all about this. So we just wanted to give you a little teaser taster right now. But the best way to think of projects is projects are a way for you to put markers on the map and lines on the map and polygons on the map and add information to those like pictures and text that allows you to build your own map and your own story around that map. So for example, if I go into the edit mode of this example I showed you before, I can try editing one of the place marks right here. So, I'm not sharing, am I? Sorry. This would be more helpful. So if I share my screen again, I'm going to back out and redo what I just said. All right, so I'm in the projects, which is this third icon up. I have a project listed here. I'm going to hit the little pencil button to go into edit mode, and then I'm going to edit an individual feature. And so what you'll see is we have what we call a GUI, a graphical user interface, because what you're actually writing here is a type of computer code. But here's the great thing. You don't need to write computer code. You just need to type in the boxes and connect to images and change icons, kind of like in the same way that you interact with, say, a Google Doc. All the code making happens behind the scenes. It's done automatically. What you're doing is adding your own pictures and adding your own text and, you know, changing the icons if you want. You can even do things like upload your own custom icon. Again, we're going to talk about all this in more detail in the next session. And that will explain you how you make these, and then hopefully you're going to go away and you can make some awesome projects that you'll share with us. Okay, so hopefully that helps. All right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. All right, so let's see. You know, we still have a bit of time here, but really, you know, the last thing we had to say is what I said already, which is, you know, next steps for you guys here, and I'm going to post this in the classroom as well. Do those workbook exercises, chapters 1 and 2. This will walk you through how to navigate and the basics of how to get around in Google Earth, and it will set you up for the next seminar when we're gonna dive into making projects and the content in Voyager, first of all, which is chapters 3 and 4 of the workbook. So don't worry about that stuff too much now, unless you're done with chapters 1 and 2 and want to skip ahead. But please, you know, for next time, work on chapters 1 and 2, practice flying around in Google Earth. And we have some help and support that will come with that I think Nicole is going to talk about just to end our session. I will hand back over to Nicole.
Great.
No more questions.
Thank you, John. And yeah, really, thank you so much for walking us through all the functions and features of Google Earth and getting us excited to make our own project in 2 weeks' time. But especially thank you to all our PNG and Australian schools for joining today and following along with John's demo. If you're able to, if you weren't able to, that's completely fine as well. This session has been recorded, so we'll be able to share that with you in the next few days. So if you didn't catch some of what John had been touching on, you can look back at the recording after that. So before we meet for our next workshop on the 9th of March, sorry, there was an error in the chat, it's the 9th. There's just a couple of reminders that I want to run you through that I'll just share my screen. Sorry, one sec. So as John mentioned, students and teachers can now go away and start working on chapters 1 and 2 of the Exploring Our World student book, workbook. And so students can do that individually, or you can do that in your past school teams or your whole class. That's completely up to you. And start having a go at accessing and using Google Earth. As I mentioned, our next session for this collaborative activity, Exploring Our World, is on the 9th of March, so in 2 weeks' time. And this will be accessible by the same Google Meet link. So we'll use this same link for each of the Exploring Our World activities, but we will share this details with you again as well. And so during this session, John will introduce the storytelling project and also walk us through chapters 3 and 4 of the student workbook. Now moving a little off topic of Exploring Our World, tomorrow afternoon we have scheduled the Effective Learning Action Research Workshop with Tom Barrett, who will introduce the process of action research and micro-teaching. So for this one, we encourage PNG and Australian teachers, leaders and coaches to join this session, especially those who have a particular interest in STEM. So we'll provide those details in the WhatsApp chat, but we really look forward to reconnecting with our teachers for that session as well. Next is the Photo Friendships Collaborative Project, which is available for students and teachers to start now. And so as part of this activity, you will have about 3 weeks to capture 1-second videos of your everyday life and just really provide your partner schools and all the schools involved a real snapshot into what it's like to be a student or teacher in your community, a snapshot of your family and an environment as well. And so they will all be compiled and showcased to the cohort just to show what it's like and reconnect with everyone. And lastly, I'll just touch on there's a lot of different tools and support available for you while you undertake all these activities. So we do encourage you to visit the PASS website, which you'll be able to find all the activity details and resources for the project. So I'll take you across here. So if you're accessing the website just from its home page, you'll see up the top here we have different tabs that go along. And so to find what's currently available to schools in phase 2, it's under 2022 to 2023 activities and projects. So if I want to find Exploring Our World, it's under collaborative school projects. So I'll select this drop-down arrow, and then it will bring up the 3 collaborative projects that are available in term 1 at the moment. So there's Photo Friendships, Exploring Our World, and We Change the World, which will be launching in about mid-March. So I'll click on Exploring Our World, and it will take me to its own page full of resources and information. And so it provides a bit of an overlook of the past goals that it's targeting, the different school teachers and students that are could be interested in taking part. There's a description of the activity. There's a bio about John that you can learn more about his history and all the many countries he's been to. There's the program details, which outline what the activity entails. And so it outlines each of the different online workshops and the different resources available to schools. It also looks at what you will need to access each activity. So a lot of those are just group access to computers at your school, internet connectivity, and also access to the project materials, whether they're online or printed. There's those learning outcomes and areas that John touched on, including the curriculum links. Key dates and events. So each of the session dates that are upcoming and the time in Google Meet. And then probably what everyone's most interested in is the materials for this. So you can see here we've got the teacher guide, the student workbook, and the Google Earth manual. And so what Jerry was asking about how to download those. So when you hover your mouse over these resources, you can click on them. So it pops out. That will load. And then this top right-hand corner that has this arrow pointing down, that's how it downloads to your computer drive, your desktop. So that's how you can access that, and you can print it off from there. I'll speed up, I've got 1 minute. The next is the past classroom. And so this will have all the activity details available for you that will take you through. So if you access the classroom and click up the top along here to classwork, again, you'll see the different collaborative projects and learning activities available in term 1 so far. So if I click on Exploring Our World, John's already posted a post here which looks at introducing you to Google Earth and what you need to do to get ready for this workshop. And there's also a space down here where you can ask any questions or make any comments, and that can be seen by others within the classroom and something that John can respond to as well. So that's a good place to put any questions that you might have. So aside from that, if it's all too much, you can just contact our team via WhatsApp or email, or again in the Google Classroom. And we're, of course, really happy to help with any queries that you have taking part in the activities. But that's really it from us today. So thank you so much for joining today's session. We really hope you got a lot out of it, and yeah, you got to see Google Earth maybe for the first time. So we will see you all again for this workshop in 2 weeks' time. So thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.